Let's talk about the #1 peak performance unlock that most people have never even heard of. Now, most successful founders are obsessed with peak performance, and fair enough, right? If you can get the edge, you take it. Between the books, the biohacks, the 5 a.m. wake-ups, the cold plunges, the supplements, the seminars, anything that can give us that little bit of advantage over our competition, over a past version of ourselves, we take it. We're told that if we're not growing, we're dying. So we take every opportunity that we can to improve, to grow, to expand our capacity. But here's what nobody in the peak performance space is talking about. Peak performance on its own is only half of the equation. And the half that's missing is what allowed one of my clients to grow his business 242% in 10 months while connecting more with his family, playing with his kids, and actually enjoying his work, without some massive business overhaul or working more hours. In this video, I'm going to show you what that other half is and why most high performers are completely ignoring it and what happens when you keep chasing peak performance without the second half. Now, I'll warn you now, the answer is not what you'd expect and it's going to make some people uncomfortable. But for those who are able to embrace it, we'll be able to build a highly profitable business while reclaiming peace and time with their family. And not just be successful on paper, but actually feel free. Now, if you're new to this channel, my name is Victor Pierantoni. I've been coaching for over 10 years, and I've worked with over 500 clients across all industries. I've worked with e-commerce founders, agency owners, coaches, CEOs, former Navy SEALs, SpaceX engineers, elite athletes, and everything in between. I started my coaching career at the largest personal development company in the world, where I worked with close to 400 clients over the course of 3 years, and I was ranked the #1 coach globally out of 120 coaches in 2017, based purely on client feedback. A few disclaimers before we dive in. I'm not for everyone, and my content is made specifically for 6 to 7 figure entrepreneurs and founders with families. I make no income claims. I just share stuff that has worked for myself and my clients. I curse sometimes, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I know some good shit that some people have found helpful. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's party. Chasing peak performance on its own can make a person the best at what they do in one area, but it can also end up taxing them in other areas of their lives way more than they might expect. Think about the lawyer who works an 80-hour week but never sees his kids, claiming that he's doing it all for his family, the same family that he never sees, of course. Or the CEO who's go, go, go all day long, making it rain, cashing checks and snapping necks, only to come home and veg out on the couch, unable to connect with his wife. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he feels like he doesn't have anything left in the tank and just wants to decompress and be left alone. Now, to be clear, many people achieve peak performance without ever dealing with what I'm about to talk about. And while they achieve great things, everything becomes vanity. Everything starts feeling empty. They wind up feeling completely empty inside, compelled into chasing the next high just to feel something without ever being able to truly relax and be at peace. And we see extreme examples of this every day. Right? You think about somebody like Tiger Woods, who's the greatest golfer of all time, with more accolades than most professional athletes. And he's also in the news for his relationship drama and more recently, a DUI. Or you think about Will Smith, who's one of the greatest actors of all time, whose relationship dirty laundry has been aired very publicly over the last few years, and most notably the infamous slap at the Oscars, followed by an immense amount of public shame and an attempted comeback with the wackest raps that you've ever heard from Big Willie in your life. And for somebody who's been a fan of Will Smith since the 90s, it is a far cry from getting jiggy with it. Now, for the record, I love Will Smith as an actor. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is one of my favorite nostalgic shows from the 90s and from my childhood. But I digress. Now, there are countless examples of this trope. Someone exceptional in their given area of expertise, admired and revered by many, yet completely unfulfilled, leading into incongruency under the weight of pressure just to stay on top. Now, this idea is very similar to doing a super heavy squat while your spine is twisted and bent, which is adding load to dysfunction and compromising the entire system, which ultimately leads to destruction and chaos. Now, the root of this issue is what I like to call the inner civil war, which ultimately causes the person to be completely incongruent. In other words, they're one version of themselves at work and one version of themselves at home and a completely different version of themselves internally. So they're getting pulled in all kinds of directions, and it is compromising their energy, their ability to execute, and be be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to actually enjoy their success and celebrate and be present with the people that they love. The inner civil war is going to pull somebody in all directions, and until that's solved, it's adding that load to dysfunction. It's adding more weight to a twisted and bent spine. Now, the key to being congruent with who you are at work and who you are at home is to dial in both peak performance and peak fulfillment. Now, peak fulfillment is less common for most entrepreneurs and founders, as most of them treat fulfillment as though it's some afterthought or a reward that they get after they've achieved enough, after they've hit enough of their milestones. Now, to give you a simple definition, peak fulfillment is not about how alive you feel when you get to the top of a mountain or some crazy feat. It's more about being able to find adventure in the little things, like a smile, or finding joy in just little moments that you create with the people that you love. It's the ability to be playful, flirty, and have belly laughs with your spouse even after years of marriage, or the ability to feel the same joy and triumph as your kid feels when you watch them score their first goal in their little league soccer game. Now, most frustrated founders lose this because they never actually prioritize or practice fulfillment. Peak fulfillment is the number one unlock for peak performance because it produces a flow state that permeates every area of your life, not just business. So it's the tide that raises all ships, and research shows that when we are in a flow state, our productivity and performance go up 500% above baseline. Make sure to go check out my video, Did They Lie to Us About Discipline, for a deeper dive on how to actually prioritize fulfillment. I'll put the link in the description. Both peak performance and peak fulfillment are severely limited by emotional debt. So a quick recap on emotional debt, as I've talked about in other videos, is that it is the accumulation of all of your unprocessed emotion, inner conflicts, limiting stories, and negative thinking patterns that pile up over time and compound in your system just like financial interest. And it distorts your decision making, drains your energy, and quietly caps both performance and fulfillment simultaneously. No bueno. And for a full deep dive on emotional debt, make sure to go check out the video, The Business Bottleneck That Nobody's Talking About. The links will be in the description. My goodness, we're only a few minutes in and I'm already pointing you to all these different videos. You got homework to fully understand the context of this. Anyway, once again, I digress. Now, peak performance is the more common one that most entrepreneurs and founders are chasing, right? They read all the books, they go to the seminars, they listen to the gurus, they biohack with cold showers, supplements, they do the keto diet, and it works to create some results, right? You immediately start noticing some changes as you start changing these strategies. Because dialing in your peak performance strategy is crucial to staying sharp and to succeed. Where it starts to add load to dysfunction, however, is when it attempts to mask insecurities and weaknesses. And for most founders, it's not their fault, because that's what general personal development teaches everyone. That if you're a loser, or your teachers, school bullies, or family members told you that you wouldn't be shit, so personal development just tells you just go prove them wrong by achieving so much that they can't ignore you. Allow your success to make the noise, because as they say, success is the best revenge. And so most entrepreneurs take that as a personal challenge and they make their ambition to succeed their entire personality, posting quotes like, "A lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of sheep," or some bullshit like that. Eventually, they climb the mountain that everyone said that they couldn't. And they don't just prove everyone wrong, but they far surpass what other people or even themselves imagined possible. And for myself, I was no different. Now, for context, I was one of those privileged and spoiled kids on one side of my family where they would buy me stuff and support me as long as I was following their plan. And when I was 18, I got what I thought was the golden ticket, kind of like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, where my grandfather offered to pay for my college education and then promised me a spot in the family business, which was basically a guaranteed path to being rich and successful. Again, as long as I followed their script. But just like in the Willy Wonka movie, Charlie recognizes that what he had romanticized about Willy Wonka and his factory was all a very disappointing illusion. And Willy Wonka wasn't the great guy that he thought he was. He was just a taskmaster that would exploit his workers. And the golden ticket that he dreamed about for so long ended up just being some bullshit. And something very similar happened for me. 2 weeks into working for my grandfather, I had a very similar realization and also realized that I hated the work and could not envision myself doing this for the rest of my life. No matter how much money and success was on the line, I couldn't do it. But I was young and I was dependent on the security of the job that my family provided. So I ended up doing that song and dance for 3 years until one day I said, fuck it, and I quit to start my own freelance personal training business. I very quickly realized how humbling entrepreneurship could be, which led me to personal development. And as I started binging personal development videos, it hit me like a ton of bricks. After a few weeks of winding down this personal development rabbit hole in my college apartment, I stumbled upon a Tony Robbins video. And I didn't know who he was, but I was instantly captivated by how he was inspiring the people in the crowd and changing their lives. And my immediate thought was I could do that, which, to be clear, I had no business saying at the time. I was 21 years old with no speaking or coaching experience whatsoever. But to me, that didn't matter. I remember feeling this deep knowing in every fiber of my being that this was what I was meant to do, that this was the path that was calling me. Maybe not exactly like Tony Robbins, but there was something about what he was doing that made my entire nervous system respond in a way like I had never felt with anything before, which again, I had no business saying that based on my prior training and or experience, but all I knew is that this felt more real than anything I'd ever felt in my life. I immediately went to my grandfather and I told him that I was going to drop out of school to pursue personal development because they didn't teach it in school. And I showed him the same video that hit me like a lightning bolt, eagerly anticipating him to encourage my dreams because I had finally found direction. But that is not at all what happened, as you can imagine. He looked at me like I had 3 heads and he said these exact words to me. He said, "If you think you're going to do that, you're fucking dreaming. You need to be born with talent like that, and you don't have that." Now, initially when he said those words, it stung for a moment. And then what replaced that sting was a fire that lit within me. And I responded to him, "Thank you for that, because not only am I going to do it, but I'm going to be one of the best in the world at this." And so I dropped out of school, took all my college money, some of which I inherited from my mom when she passed, and some that he gave me, and I went all in on Tony's programs. I bought every audio program, every event that Tony had to offer, and even hired myself a Tony Robbins coach to coach me along the journey. I became obsessed. Every hour of every day, I worked my ass off for years. I did a bunch of random sales jobs to support myself while I obsessed about all of Tony's content. Learned it inside out, and I even picked up a few coaching clients along the way. At first, those coaching clients were basically people that I would coach for free, essentially anyone who would listen, because I was 23 years old and, again, very little experience. But eventually, with those reps of those free clients, I started getting better. I started getting results, and I started getting some testimonials just with some of the skills and tools that I was learning. And so eventually, those free clients started turning into paying clients, albeit very low paying clients, but I had broken the financial barrier of actually charging for the coaching and actually getting people a return on their investment. Now, through all of this, my coach saw how hard I was working and how my skills were developing quickly, so she offered to give my resume to the director of coaching. I got the interview and I got offered the job. I had landed my dream job and I'd proven my grandfather wrong. And not only that, 18 months into that career, I was ranked number 1 out of 120 coaches based purely on client feedback. And in that moment, what should have felt like the ultimate success actually felt a little bit empty, because now that I'd proven my grandfather wrong, all of my motivation was gone. And in retrospect, he didn't even really care all that much that I did what he considered impossible. Whenever we prove people wrong and do the impossible, for a moment it's exciting, but it quickly fades as the realization sets in that those teachers, bullies, and family members don't actually give a shit what you've achieved. While their words hurt, they simultaneously create an unbelievable drive and motivation to succeed. But what happens once we've actually proved them wrong and achieved everything that they said that we could? We feel empty and deflated, and we wonder what it's all for. And that is because it was never about them to begin with. We don't actually care about proving anyone wrong. That's just the surface level motivation, because it activates emotion within us and it drives us to move forward. Now, earlier we mentioned emotional debt, and emotional debt is not just the unprocessed feelings that we have. It's also the unexpressed and unmet needs of our childhood and adolescence. So where our motivation is really coming from is it's not this ambition to prove people wrong. Where our motivation is actually coming from are our unmet needs that weren't available to us in childhood and adolescence. These unmet needs are an internal problem, and we equate these unmet internal needs to being a lack of external success and achievement. What we're actually looking for is to meet the needs that weren't available to us in childhood or adolescence, because unmet needs as well as unexpressed needs in childhood turn into irrational demands of ourselves in adulthood. We need to feel safe. We need to feel seen. We need to feel heard. We need to feel understood. We need to feel valued, and ultimately to be loved. And when we don't get those things, especially from key people like a parent, a friend, or an authority figure, they don't just go away. We unconsciously go on a quest to meet those needs, attempting to fill those internal voids with external means. We needed to feel safe as a kid, so as adults, we stack cash in investment portfolios as though our sense of peace and safety is correlated with how big a pile we are able to make in terms of material wealth. We needed to feel seen, so we try to be the best at what we do and we become more successful than everyone who has ever doubted us so that we can't be ignored. We needed to feel heard and understood, so we turn to anger and we assert ourselves and we use our voice and we say what's on our minds whenever we feel taken advantage of. We needed to feel valued and loved, so we spend an undue amount of time away from those we love and work so hard to provide as well as to try to please and take care of everyone around us so that we can finally give ourselves the permission to do the things that we love, like making music or art or training martial arts or doing some kind of a hobby without having to feel the guilt that we're not working hard enough or that we're not being productive enough. We just want to feel free to do the things that we love and be ourselves. And then we justify all of this and we tell ourselves we're doing it all for them, for the people that we love. We're doing it for our families. And most founders think, oh, I'll just make so much money that I'll be financially free so that I can take care of my family and never have to work again. And that sounds great in theory, but it's a very different story in practice, something that I've seen dozens of times, where the people who say that never stop to think about what happens when they actually succeed and they no longer have anything to distract themselves from their own thoughts and the mountain of unprocessed emotional shit that they've spent years running away from. So even when they accomplish their goals or have a big windfall, they immediately move the goalposts on to the next thing. They want to spend more time with their wife and kids, but default into secretly thinking about work when they're with them. And to make matters worse, if their family ever seems unappreciative or ungrateful for all of their hard work and all of the opportunities that their hard work has afforded the family, or all of the material things like the toys, the jewelry, the cars, the house, if their family ever seems unappreciative or ungrateful for any of that, a lot of them start feeling offended or self-righteous, or they start shutting down. And they often scoff and think to themselves, or sometimes even think out loud, I did all of this for you and you don't even appreciate it. I could be out there doing other important things or in my business making money. It's like, bro, other important things? Like, are these people fucking serious? The founders who are truly doing it for their family are the ones who are prioritizing fulfillment and actually spending time with their wife and kids fully present. I remember I once had a mentor who was exactly like this, who I put him in the bucket as one of my greatest teacher, which, by the way, when I use the phrase greatest teachers, it's not a compliment. It's my way of referring to people who are more like anti-mentors, where most of the wisdom that you get from them is about what not to do or how not to be. And he was always encouraging people to be busy and productive all the time and would constantly talk about how he was doing everything for his kids and that being a dad was the most important thing for him. And yet, in the same talk he was giving, he admitted in a room full of people that if he wasn't always moving or making things happening or producing, then he would be anxious and depressed, and that he didn't even want to know what he'd find in his mind that he had suppressed if he ever stopped. And he even directly said that he was using success and achievement to essentially run away from his emotional debt. And that's the whole thing right there. This is a man who's telling everyone, all of his students, that he's doing it for his kids, while he's secretly terrified of what would happen if he actually stopped to be present with them. Pete Holmes is one of my favorite comedians, and he has a bit about how every successful guy says, everything I do is for my family. And then he calls this out in one of his bits. He's like, no, you don't. In his bit, he talks about Mark Wahlberg's reality show where he's riding a motorcycle through Singapore with a samurai sword through his leather jacket. And Pete's like, you're not doing this for your family. You already live in a $40 million house. You did it. You actually do it because it makes you feel important, because you like being good at something, because you like being somewhere where everyone's excited to see you. And he essentially goes on saying that it's better to just be honest and stop pretending that you're doing your family a favor by doing all this. And if you actually want to do them a favor, to actually just spend time and be present with them. Now, both examples, right? Prove people wrong who have doubted you in the past, or doing it for your family, as Pete Holmes was mentioning. Both of those are endless, vicious cycles where your emotional debt is essentially running you. The truth is, we're not trying to actually prove these people wrong who doubted us or do it for our family. And what us ambitious folk do instead is we end up creating what are called hungry ghosts in our mind who look like the people who doubted us, or who look like imaginary versions of our kids, looking all disappointed and sad if we don't succeed and provide them the lifestyle that we say is all for them. These hungry ghosts in our minds convince us to give them everything as they dangle the carrot of fulfillment in front of us, always close, yet seemingly out of reach. But none of the people from your past give a shit about how hard you work or how much you achieve. And the truth is, your kids don't either, because they'd rather have more of you than working a ton of hours for them. Because in their mind, their parents aren't working super hard for them. In their mind, they start thinking that they're not worthy of their parents' time and attention. So they don't feel valued, and then their unmet needs turn into the same shit when they grow up. And the cycle continues for generations unchecked. And if you need one more data point just to send this home, Carl Pillimer interviewed over 1,000 elderly Americans in their final years of life. Not a single one said that to be happier, you should try and work as hard as you can to make as much money to buy the things you want. Not one of them said that it's important to be at least as wealthy or more wealthy than the people around you, because what they valued were quality friendships, being part of something bigger than themselves, and spending quality, unstructured time with their children. 1,000 deathbed data points, and nobody looked back and wished that they had worked harder. Carl Pillimer puts it simply: your kids don't want your money. They don't even want what your money buys anywhere near as much as they want you. Specifically, they want you with them. And as much as I wish that this were purely theoretical and that we could escape it, or that it wasn't actually as dire as I'm making it sound, the truth is 91% of the time that you will ever spend with your kids happens before they turn 18. So the clock is already running, and it doesn't pause while you're grinding towards the next milestone. You see, many successful people look at ambition as this game of trade-offs, which is a fancy way of playing mental gymnastics with the symptoms that they're experiencing rather than addressing the root of the problem. And all roads lead back to emotional debt. That is the root of the problem of all of the pains that a person may be experiencing. It's the same reason why somebody can be successful on paper and yet still not feel free. Because emotional debt is that accumulation of all the unprocessed negative emotions, but it's also the unmet, unexpressed needs of the past that turn into irrational demands in the present. And those irrational demands are the same things that would drive a person to work late, longer hours, instead of tucking their kids in for bed. And so when people talk about how success is this game of trade-offs, they're trading off the wrong things. They're saying, well, I can spend a little less time with my kids because I'm going to build something great and we're going to have so much money. And the reality is that, just like that example that I gave from Carl Pillimer, where he interviewed 1,000 elderly people on their deathbed, none of them gave a shit about that. Like, that's not what they valued when they were faced with their own mortality. There's this really powerful Stoic practice called memento mori, which means to remember your mortality. It's not only talked about in Stoic philosophy, but also other philosophies and spiritual practices. And memento mori is to remember your mortality, to remember that your time here is not unlimited. There is a limit to your time here and the time that you spend with the people that you're with. So with that being said, it is key not to trade off the wrong things, not to trade off time with the people that you love, not to trade off time in doing what is fulfilling for you in order to achieve something, to prove somebody wrong, or to chase some vanity metric. That's the key. So when it comes to ambition, it's not about making stupid trade-offs with the things that are actually important. If you're going to increase your ambition, you must also increase your capacity as a husband and a father. And if not, you're fucked. Or you're putting yourself at risk of your kids eventually calling you by your first name, which is really not recommended. There's a very powerful illustration of this idea from the cartoon Avatar: The Last Airbender. And if you haven't watched it, you need to. Watch it with your kids. Because yes, it is a kid's show, but it also teaches timeless wisdom and philosophical principles better than most shows that I've seen. And funny enough, I've actually assigned this as homework to multiple 7-figure coaching clients to watch with their kids, and they all loved it. Now, in the show, there's this very lovable character named Uncle Iroh. Now, he's universally loved by fans because he is lighthearted, funny, and incredibly wise. But he wasn't always that way, because in the past, he was this fierce warrior who would vanquish his enemies with ease. So much so that he was known as the Dragon of the West, always conquering, always destroying. Now, during one of his sieges of one of the major cities in the show, his only son was with him and ended up getting killed in battle. And this experience completely broke him, where suddenly his ambitions to be a great warrior crumbled under the grief of his son's death. His ambitions had grown far beyond his capacity to be a father, and he lost sight of what was truly important to him, not realizing it until it was too late. Now, of course, this is a cartoon and an extreme example, but the truth remains. Oftentimes, we don't realize what's important until it's too late. That is what the power of grief teaches us. But ask yourself, do you want to actually allow yourself to get to the point where you have an experience that makes you realize that everything that was truly important in your life, that you don't realize it until it's actually too late? Probably not. I wouldn't recommend it. So instead, we got to be proactive and prioritize fulfillment, prioritize connection with the people that we love, and make sure that if our ambitions are growing where we want to do more, create more, serve more people, make more money, live a wealthier life, then we must simultaneously grow our capacity as a parent, spouse, and as a friend, and be able to be better with the people that we love, because in the end, that is what truly matters. It is the relationships that we have. It is the treasures that we find in our friendships, in our relationships with our kids and with our spouses, and the unforgettable memories that we are able to create together. Now, one of the clients that I had assigned the Avatar show as homework to watch with his kid almost made the same mistake as Uncle Iroh. Now, obviously not in battle, but in business, right? He was so consumed by the pursuit of his first $1 million month that his family was getting the leftover version of him. And his son was growing up and he was missing a lot of it. He was doing a lot of traveling. He wasn't spending as much time with his wife. And his music, the thing that made him feel most alive, had been completely shelved. And then one day, I remember, and he shared with me that one day he was looking at his numbers and feeling nothing but emptiness, wondering what he was doing it all for. And he had this existential crisis. And it was at that point that we started working together again. And when we did, one of the first things that I had him do was to prioritize his fulfillment. Actually start playing music again, because it was the thing that made him feel most alive. To spend more time with his wife and son, because that's what brought him the most meaning in his life. And so he did. And he started reorienting his days using our perfect day routine protocol. He started actually beginning his mornings with music and with his family, which led to him starting a band in his 40s. So on the personal side, everything was grooving. Everything was feeling good. He was playing music. He was spending time with his family. He even recorded a few professionally produced songs, made a professional recording studio in his basement, and was playing live shows with his band with a small fan base. But on the business side, he ended up hitting that $1 million month and then continued hitting it every single month. And on top of all that, he ended up reconnecting with his faith in the way that he never had before, which brought deep fulfillment and meaning into his life. Now, he was able to do all this, not because he expanded his ambitions by grinding harder. What he did is he expanded his capacity as a human being first, as a father, as a husband, as an artist, as a human being. And inevitably, the business reflected that. That's the equation. Peak performance plus peak fulfillment. Not one or the other. Both are required. So if this resonated with you and you want to understand what it actually looks like to build both peak performance and peak fulfillment simultaneously, DM me the word liberation at victor.liberationcoach on Instagram. Or don't, whatever works for you. But if you do, it is actually me in the DMs. There's no setters, no closers, no AI clones. So ask me whatever you want. No pressure. I'll see you in the next video.